So discovering this information is called, is through an assessment called a functional behavior assessment. So I did see in some comments before that some of you guys are in groups, but I would really love to hear from some of you or to have you put in the chat, why do we consider function? And you can type it in the chat if you're comfortable, you can turn your mic on and I'd love to hear from you. Any ideas? Okay, to help increase or decrease the behavior, that is ultimately what we're after. Jennifer says all behavior occurs for a reason. If we understand the reason, then we can intercede before the behavior occurs, which allows us to create a BIP that is functional. All right, those answers are correct, and I want you to consider it through this example. So this is something I had the opportunity to observe. At recess, when the lineup bell rings, a student continues to run on the playground. Staff chase her, try to convince her to come in, including giving her a piggyback ride back into the building. When she arrives inside, she goes to a refocus room where she receives one-to-one support because she's very little to do a think sheet. So what is happening if this student's problem behavior is maintained by attention from staff? So what's happening is that the student is getting it, right, through being chased around the playground. And then this think sheet, is it likely to serve to change the behavior going forward or actually make it more likely to happen going forward? And the answer to that is make it more likely. If what she likes is attention from staff, getting that level of staff on the getting that level of staff attention on the playground, and then again when she arrives back in the refocus room, even though the intervention is intended to stop the problem behavior, it's likely reinforcing it. So there's an example as to why we need to know the function or make a hypothesis as to what the function is. And we'll keep coming back to this example. So what is happening if the student's problem behavior is maintained by escape from the next scheduled activity? So say math comes next and it's the student's least favorite subject. And so every day at the 2 p.m. recess, she runs all over, comes back inside, does a think sheet. And by the time she's finished, she's figured out how to time it right to escape math altogether. So the interventions that we put in place are relevant to the cause of the behavior. So when is an FBA conducted? As I said before, it's conducted when the behavior is a repeated occurrence. So conducting a functional behavior assessment on a one-time behavior is kind of difficult. It's something that you might have to do in certain situations for legal obligations, but it's not really the purpose of the functional behavior assessment. Why is the behavior continuing to occur? A functional behavior assessment should also be conducted when the behavior is not responded to other interventions. Functional behavior assessments in all reality are labor intensive, and time consuming. And so there are times where we might try other interventions ahead of the functional behavior assessment, and that can be appropriate just as we manage the resources of our buildings. So check-in, check-out is often a very effective behavioral intervention for kids. It provides some one-to-one attention, usually with a preferred staff, and maybe a tiny bit of escape because of getting out of the class. So a lot of times that by itself can help behavior. The student also then kind of learns to self-monitor throughout the day. It's not always the answer, but it's just an example of something to try before jumping into a labor-intensive FBA. Also, when an FBA is also kind of prioritized when behavior causes high levels of disruption or is dangerous. So if we have a student who is making a classroom environment to where no one can access the education, including the student themselves, that would be a time to probably need to jump a little bit more than like an easy intervention and put something more complex in place. So how is an FBA conducted? A number of things. One is data collection on events surrounding the behavior. So this is commonly done with ABC charting. So that is the A stands for antecedent, or an antecedent can also be a setting event. The B is the behavior, and the C is the consequence. So the antecedent, this is usually done by people who are there when the behavior is occurring. So I will usually ask teachers to chart a few instances of the problem behavior so that we can analyze the occurrence and the patterns there. So, you know, what time of day was it? Who was present? What was going on? Was there any type of setting event? Did the student come in late and they skipped breakfast, or did they happen to lose recess? So all of those things that might have made the behavior more likely to happen, all those antecedents would be recorded. And then the behavior is in that middle column. What did we observe the student doing? And by observe, that's really what we're looking for when we're doing an FBA. What did you see the student do? What can you describe in words that are observable and measurable? So the student became angry and defiant. Well, that looks very different depending on the teacher. So some students can have small amounts of problem behavior that get called defiant, and some really have to be egregious. It kind of depends on the teacher's perspective. So you want to be able to quantify that in a way that makes sense to everybody. I passed out the homework assignment. The student said, "I'm not doing this," and ripped it up and threw it in the garbage. So that type of observable and measurable terms are really helpful when we're analyzing behavior. I would also recommend that they look like that when we write them up in behavior logs versus he's angry and defiant or something along those lines. Just what did the student actually do? And then the consequence. So this one is hard for people to understand. Consequence doesn't necessarily mean like some kind of punishment that we've put into place. It just means what happened as a result. So those types of things can be like, well, they ended up missing math because they were doing a think sheet, or all the peers were staring at him or her and laughing. So we might see maybe they're doing it to get a reaction out of their peers. So just environmentally, what kind of consequence did we have? What was happening as a result of the behavior? Did they get sent home and missed the rest of the school day? Did they have to stay in from recess? So some of those things can be things that we've imposed, but some of those things can be the reactions of the staff, the reactions of the students, and in any way that the environment was changed as a result of the behavior. I alluded to this earlier, but interviewing the teachers, the parents, the student, and others who know him or her well is an important part of the functional behavior assessment. If any of you conduct functional behavior assessments, my favorite interviewing tool for teachers is called the FAIRT, F-A-I-R-T, Functional Assessment Interview Tool for Teachers. And so I utilize that almost on all occasions when I'm doing a functional behavior assessment. And though if you just Google it, that form's available online. And I also interview the student, and actually the name of that one I'm forgetting, but I have it. The Student Functional Assessment Interview and Reinforcement Survey. And I can type that up. And again, you can just, so many FBA interview tools are available online. And so you can find those and access them if you're interested, or if you're one of the ones conducting those. I'm going to try to write this in the chat, but my mouse is being really jumpy. I'll have to do it at the end. Okay, so back here, jumped ahead on me. Observations, a critical part of functional behavior assessment. Depending on the severity of behavior, I at least try to spend a full day observing the student, and just to get a good sense of what the student's day is like, and to catch some of those setting events or earlier antecedents that may have otherwise gone undetected. Also, if you're in there for too short of an amount of time, you have the effects of reactivity, which is a condition where the observer changes the behavior of the observed. So the longer you're there, the more likely the student is to go back to his or her regularly occurring behavior. And then I try to get at least 2 more observations after that, which are typically more targeted to locations when we know the problem behavior is occurring, or even on the other side, like so-and-so has no difficulties with the speech pathologist, for example. So I just finished an FBA that where that information was very helpful, because the student was a nonverbal student and he had lots of highly aggressive behavior across environments, and no one wanted to work with the student alone, but the speech language pathologist was able to, and had never had problems with the problem behavior. So it was interesting to be able to observe that and then to replicate that across environments. There are rating scales. One example is the motivational assessment, MAS, motivational assessment scale, and it can help guide you in a direction to consider function, but those should really be used with caution and never by themselves to determine function or to make a hypothesis as to function. So Gloria says from earlier, talking about the different levels of teacher tolerance, and that's just extremely clear. And, you know, a teacher of a behavior classroom, for example, has to have a far higher level of tolerance than a gen ed teacher likely would. But then even among those gen ed teachers, there's just a lot different tolerance for what teachers will put up with and how they'll handle things. So knowing that, especially if a student transitions across environments, is an important part of looking at an FBA as well. It can skew the data in terms of like frequency of problem behavior, but you really need to, if you're looking at a graph, for example, on how frequent physical aggressions occurring, if you have different days that student has different schedules or something like that, like our high schools have black days and orange days, then you can see the data will go up and down based on those days. But if you can reorganize that data so that on black days, this is the level of problem behavior, and on orange days, it's this. So you just really have to explain. And we try to do that visually within behavior analysis, why you have different levels of behavior on different days. So when someone conducts an FBA for you, what kinds of results should you expect? And there should be a general hypothesis as to the reasons the behavior continues to occur. So the student, if we're looking at the 4 main functions of problem behavior, which I think is my next slide, escape, avoid, attention, access to tangible, and automatic, which one of these, or 2, if that's relevant, but it's nice to try to drill down to 1 and get your interventions really aligned to that one function, if possible, and then build your plan and take the data to know if it's changing the problem behavior. So it's a general hypothesis. It's not a for sure statement. There are ways to have more certainty in your functional behavior assessment through something called a functional analysis. And if you see one of those conducted, they're more experimentally based, and they do lend itself to a more definitive answer. But in the school systems, we do not do those experimental analyses, or it's extremely rare. So we should be talking about this in terms of hypothesis. So I hypothesize that the problem behavior is occurring to escape the math class. And then it should also include events that would predict when the behavior would occur. If this happens, it makes the behavior more likely. So if there's a sub, or if they got held in from recess, things like that. And then it should also include environmental variables that are maintaining the behavior. So why does the student continue to use this behavior? So thinking about that example from the beginning, that think sheet was a consequence that actually maintained the problem behavior. So this is the computer's kind of acting a little glitchy. Okay, so Heather says, what if they seem to keep testing? We eliminate running, and the child starts pinching, spitting, and then that fades out with intervention, and now the child's knocking over peers. So what the child's doing is finding a different way to meet that same function. So in this case, I don't know this student, so I don't know why I don't know a hypothesis as to why the student's engaging in this behavior. Is it attention from peers? Is it attention from staff? It's hard to say, but if we just eliminate a behavior without meeting the function in a different way, then they will just go to different ways to have that need met. So it's still, with this case, Heather, drilling down to function. And if it is peer relations, then we're probably looking at a skill deficit in relating to peers, and we need to teach replacement behaviors, or not so much replacement, but alternative behaviors to engaging with peers this way. And that's just a guess as to function. If it's something else, obviously you'd have to go down that route. So these are the 4 primary functions. Escape and avoid. Escape and avoid are essentially the same thing. There's a slight technicality difference with it, where escape is they get out of it completely, and avoid is they just kind of delay it. Lots of us engage in avoiding behavior, and then timelines show up and we go ahead and get to it. But students may also just be engaging in avoiding behavior, so just kind of pushing it off. Attention is a function, attention from staff, attention from peers. So when teachers or teams, when I work with teams and they say things like, the behavior, there's no rhyme or reason to it. It just happens whenever. You can't pinpoint a time. It's often my first thing I'm going to rule in, rule out is attention. And the thing that might be triggering the problem behavior, if we're looking at attention, is that there could be diverted attention, meaning the preferred adult is giving attention to another person. There could be just no attention. The teacher hasn't said anything to him or her for a while. When I had the behavior clinic, I had a student with cognitive impairments who was very much maintained by adult attention. And so in the lunchroom, in the middle of the table, there was this bar. And I would teach the staff, if he got to the point where he was rattling that bar, it's irritating to the environment for everyone around him. And the instant reply out of everybody's mouth is to say the student's name, look at him and say, stop. But he would just laugh. So he was a student who was very much maintained by adult attention. So it was really important to provide him high quality attention throughout the day at regular intervals. If that started to happen, we knew we had waited too long. Looking at students who are more cognitively in the average range, it's the same. It can be the same kind of thing. And often we don't know that we've gone too long without paying attention to the student or giving the student high quality attention until they engage in some sort of behavior that results in us really making eye contact with them, gesturing. A lot of times we point our finger, say their name, have a lot of emotion with it. Stop doing that. So that's something to always keep in mind with attention. Access to tangibles or activities. Some students may engage in problem behavior because it gets them access to a refocus room, to even a device, to like, I need you to just calm down. I'm working with so-and-so, I'll be right there. So the problem behavior, we're just trying to make the problem behavior stop, but we're providing a tablet for the student to play on for a minute. And that's actually, what they're after. And then the automatic function just means that the behavior is maintained by some sort of internal stimuli or sensation or sensory input. It's not maintained by anything that we are or aren't doing. So when I talked earlier about an experimental analysis, the way that we do those experimental analyses in the clinic setting is actually something called the alone condition. So if the student were in a room by him or herself, would this occur? And this kind of behavior is often things like self-injurious, head hitting may sometimes provide an automatic function. One of my college professors did a study on a student who hair twirled, and they did the functional analysis, and she hair twirled so badly that she was balding and her hair was in knots everywhere, just a young preschool age child, and they determined that that was serving an automatic function. It didn't matter if the parents reprimanded her or not. The automatic function that we see most often in the school system is self-stimulatory behaviors for our pre-teen and teen students. That's the most often one I have to deal with. Other than that, there's automatic isn't a huge area for function. I'm just reading Heather's comment here. Okay. All right. Yeah, Heather, good luck with that. Trying to eliminate one behavior. If we don't consider the function, another one will just often pop back up. So again, going back to our example from the girl at recess. For prevention and teaching strategies, again, we've got our student who won't line up when it's time, and she gets a piggyback ride back into the building. And when she arrives inside, she goes to a refocus room where she receives one-to-one support to do a think sheet. So let's assume that this problem behavior is maintained by escape. What could we do? I hate how long the delay is. I'll wait for a little bit for any comments in the chat. If anyone wants to turn their microphone on, we're assuming that the next behavior is, or the next scheduled activity is something that she does not want to do. So she's doing this to escape. We've done our functional behavior assessment. That's what we are hypothesizing. What can we do? Yeah, I think do the think sheet at a different time. Try to go back to the classroom instead of refocusing, or instead of the refocus room. Thank you, Heather. And I think that brings up a good point. We can still problem solve or still work through whatever the problem behavior was with the student. But sometimes if we do that immediately after, that is potentially part of the problem. I see that most often when students have like destroyed a classroom or something and they have to clean it up. I never see that happen quickly. They are taking their sweet time. They are chatting with the adults while they're doing it. And so it could just be part of the overall function to escape or avoid something. So if something's all maintained by escape, we can try to alternate the schedule. So for this student's example, she did happen to be in a behavior program. So maybe we are having the math work or whatever she's choosing to do happen right before recess. And as soon as we're done, we get to go to recess. So just changing the order of activities is an evidence-based intervention. It's called behavior momentum. You start with something that's low probability, or I'm sorry, high probability of likely engagement, and then you follow that with things that are of lower probability of engagement. I've seen something. Looks like someone wants to join the meeting, but okay. The admit them to the meeting is right behind my screen sharing button, so I think we got it taken care of. So we can teach her to ask for breaks. So we really want to develop skills when kids engage in problem behavior. Most of the time I look at this as the student's missing some skills. So they're missing skills to ask for help potentially. They're missing skills to take a break. Then dig into the next activity. Why does she want to escape the work? Is it too hard? Is it too easy? Can it be presented in a different way? Is it the same thing day after day and it needs to be varied in its instruction? I think, again, this is, if we've got a kid that's escaping a lot as a teacher first, that was my first career, and I always go back to that. What can we do to change the environment to make it less likely that the kids want to escape from it? So how are we incorporating hands-on learning? How are we changing up activities? How's our pacing? How's the instructional level we're teaching to? Provide assistance to do the task. She may need some help. Provide incentive for doing the task. Provide incentive for coming in on time. And that's, that's actually what we ended up doing for the student, was changing. First, we had to change the staff behavior, which I guess I can talk about that a little bit later, and of chasing and piggyback riding. And then we incentivize the student for coming in on time through a token economy system that was already in place in the classroom. So then, same example, our reactive strategies. So that first chunk was, what can we teach the student? How can we prevent this from happening in the future? And equally important, how are we going to react different? So again, I'd like to hear from the group on this one. I think I've alluded to it a little bit already. What do we need the staff to do differently in their reactive strategies? Well, what do we think about the piggyback ride? Yeah, thanks, Heather. So for starters, the piggyback rides are highly reinforcing to 5-year-olds. So we should definitely not follow problem behavior with a highly reinforcing activity. So continue to prompt her to come in, but more low emotion and matter of fact. We're not chasing her. We're not distracting from the topic. We're just saying it's time to come in. It's time to come in. We're keeping that expectation there. Avoid providing the piggyback ride. Why? It's highly reinforcing. Don't chase, but do supervise. honestly, initially when I implemented the interventions for this student, I said, stay in visual contact. But that wasn't made clear. So at first they just kind of went in and she was out there alone. They were kind of around the corner. So we can't go, we have to supervise, but we don't need to chase them. And you don't need to like hide or be out of their viewpoint. You can just be there, but not chasing. And then eliminate the think sheet. What would you do instead? And Heather said this earlier, if the behavior is maintained by escape, we'll still want to go back and do what was originally scheduled to do. And then if we want to come back and do a think sheet later, we can. And we make it clear. I know that you don't like doing math, but we're going to do math one way, or the other. We're going to redirect to that activity. So in general, which strategies have better outcomes? Both are very important, but it's easier to prevent that problem behavior from occurring than to react to it. Because in that previous slide, those reactive strategies, we don't have a lot that we can do, right? We're public school system, so we can't just throw them over our shoulder and haul them in. They're not our own children. There's a limited amount of things we can do depending on the age of the student, I guess. If I know we have a lot of early childhood educators here, and that may be more developmentally appropriate at that age, but there's a limit to what we could do. So with this reactive strategies, she may have just stayed out there for very long periods of time, and we're much more likely to be kind of in control of the situation by our preventative strategies. So same example. And the reason I keep doing the same example is because the importance of the function, the importance of, I'm trying to highlight the importance of function, because the interventions look very different based on the hypothesis of function. So we can't say eloping from campus or eloping around the building or any type of eloping is always maintained by escape, because that's not necessarily true. The same exact behavior can look the exact same way. We say the topography of it is exactly the same, but it may be maintained by different reasons. And so knowing that reason, or making a hypothesis as to that reason, and trying interventions aligned with that hypothesis is what I'm trying to highlight, are important, and how different those interventions are. So if our prevention and teaching strategies, assuming this is maintained by attention, let's provide high quality attention during recess. And I define high quality attention as, I wish I had it written down, because every time I'm on the spot, I miss one of the 5, but of 5 things. We're making eye contact. Touch can include high quality attention. Facial expression, voice inflection, and here it's happening. The 5th one escapes me every time, but the point I like to make about high quality attention is children receive our high quality attention often when they're in trouble. So we look at them, we point at them, we maybe have some, look at me when I'm talking to you. We put our hands like on our fists or hands out. But when we are responding to their appropriate work, I see teachers walk around and say oh, good job with that. Keep it up. And it's not the quality of that attention, doesn't match the quality when students are in trouble. And so if we can make that shift preventatively in the classroom, those students whose problem behavior is maintained by attention, you can really start seeing a shift in that. And it doesn't, all those things don't have to be occurring at once. When I was going over the components of high quality attention, and the fifth one just came to me as like a back and forth. So when we're reprimanding students, we often make several comments. We ask them to explain themselves. We ask them to apologize. We make comments back. Whereas high quality attention during praise is often more brief. The other distinction I want to make about attention right now is, wish you guys were in person. How many of you have heard of the 5 to 1, 5 positives to 1 correction? That can be an impossible standard for some kids with problem behavior. Some kids with problem behavior start engaging in the problem behavior immediately upon coming in, and you're looking for literally anything that they're doing correctly to try to provide a positive, and it ends up being kind of like an empty one. Or I've even seen teachers, like a student was mad, and I saw the student like throw up a pillow from a refocus room, or from a refocus like area in the classroom, and they said, oh, well, thank you for throwing something soft. And they're trying, but what that 5 to 1 standard actually has come from is John Gottman's research on relationships. So his research on relationships says that in order to have he studied marriages, but in order to have a positive relationship, your ratio of positive interactions to negative interactions should be 5 to 1. So you don't have to wait and provide praise. It doesn't have to be empty praise, but just a positive interaction. And that can be, hi, Johnny, it's good. It's good to see you today. How are you? How was your softball game yesterday? That just having quality interactions is what we're looking for. Education has kind of hijacked that idea and said it had to be praise, but the research is really that those 5 to 1, those 5s need to be positive interactions, not necessarily praise. So going back to assuming the problem behavior is maintained by attention, and for this student, it was. So we really wanted to make sure we're providing high quality attention throughout other times. So especially right before the problem behavior was about to occur. So if we're really engaging with the student at recess, and these students, because they were in a behavior program, there were only a handful of them out there at a time, and they weren't great at playing with each other. So they did like to interact with the staff. So this was an appropriate intervention for these students. Provide an activity with preferred staff right after recess. So just again, altering the schedule, but we're altering it to add a preferred activity. So they're an incentive for coming in right away. Avoid distractions. So sometimes when students are really escalated, distractions can go a long way to kind of get their mind off what they're mad about. Distractions go a long way for all of us to get our mind off of what we're mad about, and we utilize them all the time. So if we start talking to the student about off-topic responses. So if a student's really escalated, we might say, hey, I like those shoes. Are they new? Or did, if you know the student well, did you see the new Marvel movie, or whatever they might like? In order to get out of a crisis situation, distractions are often helpful. However, in this case, a student maintained by attention, if you start talking to them about off-topic responses, they're getting exactly what they want. So we would want to avoid it in this example, but that's assuming that we know the function. Any questions? Feel free to use that chat or turn your microphone on. Behavior content stuff is pretty, just a lot of content on it. So don't be afraid to ask any questions. Also, the famous that's not safe comments. If a student's maintained by attention saying that's not safe, it is likely counterproductive. They're getting more, they're seeing that their behavior is getting a reaction out of you. Additionally, what I tell the teachers that I work with all the time, and it's common that I hear that's not safe, is that in all the times I've seen kids in escalation and all the times I've heard people say that, never has a student said, oh, it isn't, and stopped. So it may be maintaining problem behavior, and it's certainly not helping. And then, so again, we're looking at attention and our reactive strategies. So the best thing to do if we're going to remove a previously provided reinforcement for the problem behavior, so we previously chased her around, played with her, offered distractions, piggybacked her in, tell the student that the conditions have changed. I'm not going to chase. I'm not going to give you a piggyback ride. When the bell rings, I will wait right here. And so we're providing very minimal attention during that time period. And if a student truly is maintained by frequent attention from adults, they aren't going to wait very long. They'll come in. Also, for most of it's Wyoming, and we go to school in the winter. So there's kind of that on our side as well. Tell the student that it's time to go in, walk to the specified place, don't chase, and wait. When I have to wait out problem behavior, I start the timer on my watch as a point of reference for myself, because when you're waiting something out, it can feel like forever. And then you look down and it's been 48 seconds. So we definitely want to make sure we're giving adequate wait time for the student to make the right choice. And I just take note of how long it took for the student to come in. And then we do want, staff to take that data in the future. Because our perception of how long something's lasting can really be skewed when we're irritated, when we're waiting for a problem behavior to stop, if something is really escalated. So that's just a tip that I use. Don't chase, but do supervise. As soon as the student engages in the appropriate behavior, even if they made you wait, you should begin providing high quality attention, because we want to reinforce the appropriate behavior. If we don't and say, oh, they don't deserve that, they shouldn't get attention because they took 4 minutes to come in, we're not doing ourselves any favors to change behavior going forward. That kind of thinking is more like they don't deserve it, and it's more like I'm going to punish the behavior that already happened. Well, what already happened, and what we want to change is.
Okay, sorry.
No, that's all right.
Can I come in?
Not right now.
Okay, sorry.
Thanks. I'm in one of my school buildings. So what we want to concern ourselves with is the future occurrence of that problem behavior. So what's happened has happened, but what we want to change is next time, I don't want to wait 4 minutes. I want to wait 2. And so the best way to do that is by, as soon as they make the right choice, I'm right back on providing high quality attention. Any questions about reactive and preventative strategies in general? And each of these really have to be dialed down to the specific incident and the specific function identified. Like I said before, I just really want to highlight that the interventions look very different based on what the function of the behavior is. And I went over attention and escape because they are our most common functions. Again, eliminate the think sheet. So access to tangible can be rare. It's easier to detect when this is the problem. Sometimes at home, as parents, or in a public place as parents, we may knowingly do this. So if if we're in a waiting room or at a restaurant and the child starts acting kind of rambunctious and you need them to sit down and be quiet, we may give them a tablet or our phone. It's common for things like that to happen. And we know that we may be reinforcing problem behavior, but at the time we're needing the child to sit down. So access to tangible can be typically easier to treat as long as the item is accessible in the environment. So we can easily do things like do the work first, then you can have the desired item. So if the desired item is not accessible, maybe, I don't know, it's an inappropriate video game or tablet game, or they want access to their phone, but we've got some school policies where we are not allowing that kind of access. So as long as it's something we can provide, it's reasonable to provide, it can be easier to treat this function. So first, then, kind of systems. We can use money systems and point systems and token economies to learn additional skills. So if students are really wanting fidgets and toys, and one of my sons is like this, anything he sees he wants, and then our house is filled with stuff that he never wants to play with. But I utilize token economies for getting him to do his morning and evening routines to buy these silly things, and then I get rid of them when he's not looking. But it's just another way to teach. You can use those token economies to teach skills, common tangible things that kids are after: tablets, access to Wi-Fi, and fidgets. Some of the challenges of access to tangible functions, it can be really difficult to remove the item from the child. So if it is you can have the tablet after you complete some work, and then trying to get it back if the student's really resistant with what we can do in school, it can be hard to get it back. If the student is inappropriate with the item or inappropriate for the environment, can be a challenge. And then if it can't be provided, like a Lamborghini, or the student just wants like whatever the new video gaming console is, if it can't be provided, it's obviously there's limitations to what we can do. So again, automatically maintained behaviors. I talked about these a little bit at the beginning, but here's just a slide about it. Depends minimally on what others do. Examples: thumb sucking, stemming, hair twirling, self-injurious behavior, self-stimulation, knuckle cracking, things like that are automatically maintained behavior. Some of them are problematic. There's definitely some hair twirling that isn't causing balding issues and hair getting tied up in knots. So it doesn't require intervention, but things like thumb sucking, for depending on the age of the student, it may be appropriate to intervene with that. And it's very difficult because you can't restrict access to the thumb, and you can't give access to it for appropriate behaviors. Some of those things are very difficult to intervene with. But it's not something we deal with often in the school setting. So like I said, doesn't typically require intervention unless it's harmful to the person or others. And with many of these things, we can provide time and place that it's acceptable. My youngest was a finger sucker. And so in time, we changed it to that is like when you're in your bed activity, because it was more problematic. The peer aspect of it was the most problematic when he was getting ready to go to kindergarten. Although I think that helps take care of it for many students, but you can, when you're in your bed in your room, that's the time that you're allowed to do that. So for those of you who are dealing with automatically maintained behaviors. This slide has function-based interventions. I don't know if you guys are going to get access to these slides. We could do that, but if you click on each one, it takes you to a page for function-based interventions for that slide, for that area. So interventions for attention maintained behavior. What we've already talked about is regular access to high quality attention, neutrally redirect problem behavior. So when I talked before about how our redirections are sometimes much bigger than our typical way of interacting, those neutral redirections, and especially those done privately, can be a really good tool for students who have problem behavior maintained by attention. You can ignore the behavior, but not the child. So ignoring just leads to more intense problem behavior that often can't be ignored. So that's the biggest misconception I run into when we say, I think they're doing it for attention. Well, I'm just going to ignore them. And just like was it Heather's response earlier, they put some things in place to eliminate running, and then we're pinching and spitting, and then we're working on that, and now the child's knocking over peers. So ignoring, I can't say this enough. It seems like there's still lots of confusion around this, and regardless how many times I go over it with some of my staff, but ignoring that behavior will only make it worse. So neutral redirection, like I said, but your best bet is on the flip side, that your high quality, consistent attention is coming throughout regular interactions, and in the form of praise if appropriate. I think empty praise can be just as problematic at times, like that example I said earlier with, well, thank you for throwing something soft. So if a child is running around the room and jumping on the countertops, yelling out, and we know that the student is maintained by attention, we're ignoring the behavior by not saying anything about it, but we're engaging with the child by directing them to the appropriate behavior. So come sit down and work on this, then, then we can access whatever that we're working for. So typically a student who has that level of problem behavior does have some sort of reinforcement system in place. So we're like looking at what are we working for? All right, come over here, let's get this done. And then we can work on, then you can access your tablet time or whatever that might be. So hopefully I've explained that right. So if we just say, stop running on the cabinets, that's not safe, get down from there. We're giving them the feedback that this behavior gets me attention because we're talking to them about that problem behavior versus reminding them what they're working for and reminding them of what we need them to engage in now, what the expected behavior is. Do remember that giving a reprimand is still giving attention. We can reprimand, we can redirect, but in a way that's of lower quality in terms of the high quality attention I talked about earlier. Teach the student skills. So we can teach the student to ask for help, teach the student to tell a joke. If they have these other natural ways of getting attention or more socially acceptable ways of getting attention, they may not need to engage in the problem behavior. We can have them be the teacher helper. We can earn prize or reward for the class for appropriate behavior. That way the whole class says, oh, thanks, Johnny, you earned us this extra recess. And so then they're getting attention from the teacher and peers, and give golden tickets. So in more extreme cases, I've put interventions in place for students with attention maintained behavior where, and this student engaged in physical aggression towards peers, and it resulted in a lot of time with her teacher because of that behavior. So we put these other things in place, but then we gave golden tickets. So she could utilize that golden ticket at any time, which would be exchanged for time with a preferred person. So if she was feeling like she needed attention, and this was just in a regular ed, general ed, second grade class, she got one of her golden tickets and said, can I go see so-and-so? And we tried to pick people who are more available for students, but that were still preferred, like we have behavior tutors in this building, refocus room coordinators, things like that. And then we also, as part of that, taught her that if the chosen person wasn't available, you could choose somebody else, or you could wait for a different time. So we're still working on that skill development and not just kind of bending over backwards or disrupting the learning of other students or something like that, just for these golden tickets. It was also important for her to learn that there are other people in the building who have jobs and have needs. So interventions for escape maintained behavior. Biggest thing, and you guys probably hear it all the time, but it is very important to teach students to take breaks, to ask for breaks. What they're allowed to do during the break needs to be not super reinforcing. So I oftentimes will put an intervention in place, I call them frustration breaks and earned breaks. So I'm really frustrated and I need a break, my body's feeling this way, and I need to get out of the classroom for a minute, or I need a break from my math. And your options are, I don't know, some low interest sensory tools or a walk. And we try to really put a time frame on that, and we try to really put a number on that, so that we don't have excessive break taking. That is a bad side effect of teaching breaks. I did have a student 2 years ago who had a lot of aggressive behavior that got under control by teaching him to take breaks. And then he took breaks so long and so often that his percentage of time in class was really negatively affected. So that is something to be aware of. And a good way to pair those is by, like I said, the frustration breaks and the earned breaks. So you get 2 frustration breaks. And I do make these in cards to make it as concrete as possible for the students. And then, but you can have as many earned breaks as you want. So an earned break is earned after you complete some level of expectation that the teacher puts on. And I leave that level of expectation up to the teacher. So the student says, hey, you know, when I want to go for one of my earned breaks. And the teacher says, you know, well, what I need you to do is, and makes it relevant to the class that is happening at the time, or relevant to missing assignments, and then to provide those earned breaks. Incentivizing the work, chunking work, presenting it in smaller pieces is a very valuable tool. Make sure the skills required are within the student's repertoire. If it's in their zone of their ZPD, but not in their repertoire, make sure we're providing help. Plan for alternative activities. So how can we make the learning more fun, more engaging? And sometimes we can't do that. Like, we can't make the whole day just fun, but just by having 2, 3 really engaging activities throughout the day can help keep the kids in the class all day. That's one of the things I observe when I'm looking more at the high school level, when we've got kind of escape maintained behavior at that level. The teachers who are able to do things in a more hands-on way see far less of that escape maintained behavior than those who have just paper pencil. You can allow the student to escape if they do part of the work. So, you know, get to here and you can be done, and minimize the payoff. Don't let the problem behavior lead to escape. So if they're always missing math, we somehow need to get that reincorporated, that they're not always getting out of math. So interventions for access to tangible, teach the child to request items, remove off-limit items from the surroundings, provide access to tangible activities for appropriate behavior, consider token economies to save up for bigger rewards, learn to budget, learn to wait, and learn to delay gratification, withhold access to tangibles for or following problem behavior. Again, not as commonly a problem in the schools. Interventions for automatically maintained behavior. We can block the sensation. The hair twirling example I described earlier, they used gloves that the child wore, and then they slowly like faded the gloves by like removing parts of them. And the student eventually stopped hair twirling, and her hair grew back and there were no more knots. So those are examples. Helmet, if a student is going to engages in self-injurious behavior that causes head injury, Band-Aids to block picking. Some students pick replacement behaviors, other things to keep them busy. And if it's appropriate, if it's self-stimulatory, we would want time and place for for the behavior in an environment where it's appropriate. And yes, Heather, this is, I can either, these are PowerPoints, not Google Slides. So I don't know, Jennifer, if we have everyone's email address, or if I put mine in here, if people want to email me if they want the slides, I'm more than happy to share them. Or if we could post it somewhere.
Sure, we can post it on wpic.org. That's where we were planning on putting it. So
Okay, so I'll email both to you, but yeah, I did want to create this so it was a tool that you could go back to. So I will post it there. Just looking at the slides and the time, it looks like we're on schedule to be done pretty close to 8:30. So example here, a child who runs around the room screaming during math time, but has the skills to do the work. This is just more examples. If they want to escape, we're going to incentivize doing the work, provide it in chunks, provide breaks after getting small amounts of work done, require the work to be made up during preferred activities. If the child wants attention, they'll offer to help the child, allow the student to work with a peer, provide golden tickets to access a preferred person a couple of times a day. It's again, just to highlight the importance of making a hypothesis as to that function. Sometimes we make hypotheses and we put function-based interventions in place, and they do little to change the behavior. If our implementation integrity or fidelity is strong, then we'd really want to consider that the problem behavior is maintained by something else. And so we'd want to reconsider that hypothesis. So, and just something I hear people talk about a lot, and I think it's just a misconception out there about behavior. So events that predict the behavior, people often ask, well, what's the trigger? And the trigger is rarely able to be changed. So in the two examples, the triggers were when the bell ringing to signal the end of recess and the presentation of math work. Neither of those things can be eliminated. And I've even had teachers, feel pretty upset by getting asked, that question by, well-meaning interventionists that say, well, what are you doing that's triggering it? School itself can be the trigger for children who school is not easy for. The need for attention for students who have experienced trauma in the form of neglect. They're not getting quality attention from anyone at home. This is their only environment for it. So there's that underlying trigger. There's this lack of attention being provided in other environments. We can do little to change those things sometimes. But the real interventions come in how we respond to the problem behavior and the things that we put in place to prevent that. So in our example of the student who comes from a neglectful home, how are we putting in high quality attention regularly? This might be a candidate that's good for the check-in, check-out, like I had described earlier. So that, and maybe those checks come multiple times a day so that they're making connections with with people who care about them and who are providing that level of attention. So the trigger isn't always the answer, is kind of the thing I wanted to, the point I wanted to make there. So from my perspective, I think skill acquisition is arguably our most critical intervention. If the student has the skills to do better, to do the work, they will possibly be less likely to want to escape or avoid it. If the student has the social skills to access attention from others in pro-social manners, they'll be less likely to use problem behaviors to get attention. If the student has skills to request access to pervert items or to delay gratification, they'll be less likely to engage in problem behavior to engage or to gain access. So always looking in mind at what are the IEP goals, what does the student need to learn, how do most students his or her age get that need met? Again, just another tool that would be good for going forward is examples of function-based tools, escape, taking breaks, learning to self-monitor, development of academic skills needed for tasks, for attention, telling jokes, making friends, asking for help is a big one for attention. If any of you are working with nonverbal students, just teaching them to use some sort of universal way to request help. I try to keep it from like the elbow to the wrist, where we teach them to just like gently tap with their fingers to get attention, because many of them have learned grabbing faces, which startles people, and then it can startle the student and can end up in physical aggression because everyone's so startled, or the student can be, accused of being aggressive when they were really just trying to get attention. So I try to keep like a tap on the hand. The student's verbal and can say your name, we want them to use their verbal skills. But I've worked with several students who are nonverbal whose problem behavior was maintained by attention, and that was an important skill for them to learn. Tangible. And I think I've gone through all of these things before, but they're just kind of there in a easy to reference page for you for later. Too far. Okay, internal stimuli. So students with good verbal skills are more likely than nonverbal students to have behavior maintained by internal stimuli. So this is most easily discovered through interviews of the students. So what I mean by this, there's this example that I use one day, and it was a winter day in Wyoming, and I have a steep driveway, and my youngest son was just right under 2, and we were walking, getting ready to go get in the car, and I was in dress shoes, and the driveway was icy, and my 2-year-old or 1-year-old took off running. But just prior to getting out the door, I had opened an email that had upset me. So my tolerance for my running away 1-year-old or 2-year-old was diminished. So from an outside perspective, if someone was doing a functional behavior assessment on me, they may say, some interventions like park in the garage, don't park in the driveway when it's icy, wear better shoes, hold your child's hand, because I was already so agitated you know, and I'm like yelling at him to get back here, and I'm trying to make it down the driveway without falling. I don't want to get hit by a car. But my lack of tolerance for him at that moment was more related to some internal stimuli. So are mental health interventions an important part of a functional behavior assessment? They definitely are. And so I want, when we build these interventions with teams, that we do look at things from a functional behavior standpoint, but we're also looking at things from like the mental health standpoint. I'm a psychologist as well, and the intervention I like the most is the acceptance and commitments training. So we're looking at present moment awareness. So yes, there's something that's bothering me, but present moment awareness teaches you to deal with those things in the moment in which they're appropriate. And trying to keep your children safe and get them in the car and drive everybody to school is not the time to deal with those like internals, thought processes and triggers. So learning how to utilize present moment awareness in your life for all students can be an important intervention. Your mental health workers will be your best resource on those things. But I do want to know that they're an important part of the behavior plan. They're not always discoverable in the FBA, because with the FBA, we're really looking at the behavior and the environment. So I think this is the last slide. Yeah. So in the conclusion, the results of the FBA should have a central hypothesis of function. Interventions that match the function of problem behavior are far more likely to be successful than those that are applied arbitrarily. An FBA hypothesizes the function, and hypotheses can be wrong. Changing the hypothesis is sometimes needed. And a formal FBA process is warranted, as described previously. But as teachers or parents, we should always be considering function when we're dealing with our child or a student who has problem, who is engaging in problem behavior. What are they getting out of this in this moment? And that's all I have. And I have some time for questions, or you guys can get on with your evening. It's late.